Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of our Tactical Breakdown series, our show in which we look at the players that have been linked to Arsenal and analyse them in a statistical and analytical way with the help of some expert insight. Today I'm joined once again, this man knows so much about football. It's Drew Thompson. How you doing, mate? You good, Joel?
Yeah, I'm good. Happy Tuesday. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. I got back from golf about
Golf. Oh my god.
30 minutes ago. What's wrong? What's wrong with
It's
golf?
happened. It's happened. You're going corporate on me. We can't be friends.
Corporate. Look at me. Do I look corporate to you?
No. Thankfully you don't. So.
Goodness me. Corporate. Goodness me. Yeah. Oh dear. No, I needed another sport that doesn't require me feeling like broken after I finish it, basically. So
yeah, you're preaching to the congregation about that. I can understand.
It does the job. It does the job. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to the chat box. Thank you so much as always for joining us. I really appreciate you for jumping in, very much so, and seeing so many faces, both new and old, and regular and irregular. Sam saying first time tuning in live. Love your stuff, Tom. Thank you, mate. Very much appreciate it. And Adam as well. Hey, everyone. Happy to make live for once. Of course, for our Western listeners that are awake at this time, just like Drew, these times do certainly suit a lot better. But we're here to talk about Jurrien Timber, the Dutch international and Ajax defender that Arsenal have made, according to David Ornstein, of which we've been able to confirm as well at a £30 million approximate fee. Ajax are said to want closer to £50 million. Drew, are we going down? Are we yelling timber is what I want to know. So tell me.
Oh, goodbye. It's been great having them. Just kidding. No, I kind of feel like, I think this deal makes so much sense for the right reasons, but I also kind of feel like there was some early misconceptions about who Timber is, but then also building on that, using those misconceptions and pointing to maybe how we might actually utilize him moving forward in the long term. So I think for me, he's a very typical Dutch defender in a lot of ways. He's not, apart from some notable names in their past, most Dutch defenders, they're very, very good on the ball. Technically, they're excellent. That comes through the requirements you have at academy level in the Netherlands. You have to be very, very good technically, confident on the ball. You have to be able to drive play. Timber does all of these things. If you watch him on the amount of time during his time at Ajax, he will step into midfield quite often. He will be the one to bring the ball into midfield. He'll bypass making that pass to a midfielder. Instead, if he sees the space to drive into it, he'll kind of do it. And I think those parts of his are why a lot of fans might think he might actually challenge Ben White at right back, which I think would make sense in certain circumstances, depending on what we need technically or tactically. But I think for an overall player profile, he's very, very similar to what we get with Saliba and some other names we've been linked to, which we'll obviously come on to in a minute. But it kind of speaks to how important technical quality is and confidence on the ball and passing and receiving is to Arteta. And kind of Pep Guardiola said a lot of these things similarly, and obviously there's a lot of parallels between Arteta and Pep in terms of what to look for in players, their versatility. But the biggest thing Pep always said is you can always teach a player how to pass a ball, right? But if you can't, it's so hard to teach professional football at a certain level to be of the technical grade you need. And if you can have that in a player, the rest is kind of you can work on that. But with how good Timber is when he's on the ball, that's something that's going to be absolutely vital in terms of the profile. And we see that confidence with Saliba, and we kind of missed that, didn't we? Because I personally don't think that Holding was like the massive issue that a lot of people made out. However, there were certain instances where when you pressured Holding, he couldn't play out of that pressure by himself. And if the pass wasn't available, he couldn't make space for himself to make the pass. And then he would just kind of hoof the ball clear a little bit. And that really kind of was a big issue in our build-up. Timber resolves all those issues walking in the door. And I think that's why we're going in and spending that kind of money for a player who really gives that confidence in the back line. If something happens to Saliba again, God forbid, or if Saliba for some strange reason leaves Arsenal at any point, Timber slots in and you get the same type of player, slightly less physical, but he really gives you that confidence.
I think I absolutely agree, especially on the Holding Saliba situation. It was never for me the inclusion of Holding; it was the absence of Saliba. That was the issue for us. Holding came in and did his best, at the end of the day, and it's down to Arsenal now to make sure that we go up a level this summer and this ambition to move for a player of Timber's quality is exactly what you want to see. And I love that it came out of nowhere. I love that it proved to people what we've been saying for so long, is that the iceberg that is the transfer window, we see a little bit of what's on the surface, and underneath there is so much going on. And another bid, that's the fourth player of Arsenal have made an offer for, in the last week of the window being open. It's only been open 6 days, and we've made bids for 4 players: Rice, Havertz, Gundogan, and now Timber as well. So, and talks obviously are ongoing with Lavia, and there's hope that there might be a bid there. I'm hoping to bring you a tactical breakdown on him very soon as well. But Timber for me is such, as you pointed out, the technical ability, his comfortability on the ball, and what he will bring to the team is going to be really interesting. What do you make of like the fact that I remember when last summer he didn't move to Manchester United? Van Gaal convinced him to stay because in a few months' time the World Cup was taking place and he didn't feel as though he'd get the minutes that he needed at Man United. Those minutes aren't necessarily available at Arsenal even then to him if he moves, and yet there's apparently, according to David Ornstein, optimism that this is a deal that can be done, that is, and personal terms won't necessarily be a problem either. Do you think this strikes you as very much a deal that can be done to bring competition, and that Arteta is kind of instilling this era of rotation and era of, if you're good enough and if you show you're good enough, then you'll play?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a part of that. Obviously, getting Champions League back is hugely important. A lot of players, if they're going to have maybe reduced minutes in the door when they come in, you want to have the maximum amount of games you can possibly play, and obviously Champions League helps with that. Timber also has a lot of Champions League experience. I think that's also kind of one of the things that people are maybe forgetting is he's worn the armband at certain times as well. He has Champions League experience. We're back in Champions League. Arteta has also said that we're not going to make up the numbers this season. He actually wants to go for it as best possible in Europe. So when you bring in players that have that experience in that competition, it's important. And he comes in, ironically enough, with some of the most Champions League experience of anyone in the team, despite his age. So I think that's actually incredibly important. It allows us to switch things tactically as we need. But I do think the minutes are going to be there because obviously we don't know what's going to happen with, say, Kieran Tierney. We don't know if we can rely on Tomiyasu given his fitness concerns. Again, same thing. If something catastrophic happens to Saliba, again, and there's a long-term absence, you want to have a player there you can trust. And as much as I again, don't berate Holding, I think the drop-off was clear, and you need players that can come in and say whatever you want about what City can and cannot do given the money they have. But if they go out and get Josko Gvardiol this summer, they have 6 center backs, all of whom are good enough to start for Manchester City. So, they're all happy. There's time there. So, at certain positions, you do need that depth, and I think this is kind of what we're looking at. And obviously, of course, competition breeds players upping their level, because they know if they're not going to perform, they won't be playing. So, all these things are good aspects about the deal. And also, he's at that age where he's likely going to be here long enough to where, again, if someone else leaves, you have your in-house replacement ready and available to you as well. And that's also important in terms of building for your squad for the long-term future. Those are aspects you will need.
Absolutely. Let's go on to the statistical comparisons that we do with these players. For these, we like to make comparisons to obviously the existing option at Arsenal, which in this case is William Saliba. But we also like to make the comparisons with other players in similar positions that Arsenal have been linked to. Now, Mohamed Simakan is said to be Arsenal's alternative target to Jurrien Timber, hence why it made sense to pick him. And Tapsoba, despite being, more so a left-sided centre-back, of course, even though he is right-footed, has also been linked to Arsenal. And looking at, a centre-back and looking at the statistics that they bring, you're going to be able to see some similarities between them anyway, because the roles are the same. They're just on the other side of the field. So if we look at these statistics and we start off by looking at the amount of minutes they've played, one of the immediate things is that we look at is the reliability that Timber brings. We played and started all 34 over the Eredivisie games that Ajax had last season. Wasn't injured once. Mohamed Simakan, meanwhile, missed a large portion of the season. Tapsoba pulling in a significant number of minutes as well for Bayer Leverkusen. Saliba, of course, as we know, missed out the end of the season. But having a player with that level of reliability, a little bit similar to Rice as well, who played pretty much all of the games for West Ham, this will be something that the club are looking at. So at least until he comes to Arsenal, that's a positive. Because as soon as he does, Drew, he's having an ACL problem. We all know that's inevitable at this stage.
Yeah, no, I just saw it. No, again, having players that are available is important, and obviously, um, it's not just being available; it's about being able to be trusted when you're available as well. And that's kind of the thing. And yeah, someone like a Rob Holding was always available, but he wasn't always trusted. And I keep referring back to him because he's the obviously player you would assume Timber would be coming in to replace, presuming that Holding leaves, which I think we all expect. So yeah, I just kind of feel like when you know you can have a player that can easily log that kind of time if something happens where he has to be called on regularly, you kind of know what you're getting. So yeah, no, I just kind of there's not much more to kind of say about them. It's just more of just like, again, for me the bigger thing is the experience. Right? I don't ever look at the age of a player necessarily, but he's been pretty big for Ajax across the last few seasons. And he's played in some big games. He's matched up against some big opponents as well. He's played against like the Erling Haaland and Darwin Núñez, and he's come out pretty okay. So I think if, as ever with all these deals, kind of now I'm of the opinion that if Arteta wants them, I'm not really going to question it. It's a matter of looking at the player, seeing why he wants them, and then hoping for the best.
Absolutely. Moving forward then to some of the other statistics to look at, starting off with the goals and assists. Obviously we're looking at defenders here, so we're not gleaning too much of this, but 2 goals and 2 assists for a player that's played every single Eredivisie match at centre-half is certainly a positive thing, and it will come on to some of the creativity that Timber brings from that position in a little bit. But going into the defensive side of things, he comes out really well for a player that is, below 6 foot, whereas all of the, all the other players on this list are significantly over 6 foot, which you'll see reflected in the aerial stats we'll talk about soon. But he's aggressive in the tackle, 1.39 tackles per 90, which is higher than that of both Saliba and Simican. But the most impressive part of this is the 72.6% success rate of those challenges, significantly higher than Saliba, Tapsoba, and still, around 6% higher than that of Simican as well. He looks aggressive in the tackle. He likes getting involved with the tackle, and that's really good. Yes, there's downsides to it. We saw and have criticised Rob Holding at times for diving in, for coming out of position, pressing and moving into midfield rashly. Do you fear that, even though these are really positive stats in this sense, do you fear that there's potential that he may have to rein it in somewhat if he moves to Arsenal under Arteta?
I think maybe in certain instances, but also when we were criticizing Holding, we didn't have like Declan Rice in the team. And I think presumably if we do get Rice and he does play 6, you're getting a midfielder who has an immense understanding of the space, not only in front of him, but behind him and on his flanks. He knows how to run those channels. He knows when to drop back. And Timber, as I said before, is kind of a player that does like to step a bit higher up and is already playing a high line. He's going to be comfortable playing that high line. And he also has the recovery pace to get back, which is something that Holding didn't really have, obviously. So I do think the plus points to his game kind of mask the fact that he might step and get caught, but he'll likely be able to track back. And if he doesn't, you have Rice there presumably instead. But I do think to a certain extent he will have to kind of taper it back a bit. But also might depend on who we're using at right back. If it's Ben White, he's obviously capable of sitting deeper, so is Tomiyasu. So there's always ways to kind of mix and match and cover your deficiencies if it allows a player to go out and really give you the best bits of their game. So we'll see how kind of Arteta mixes and matches.
Absolutely. Moving forwards to blocks and clearances, 0.68, clearance blocks per 90, 1.99. Clearances per 90, it's always important to apply context in these scenarios, of course. He's playing for Ajax, one of the more dominant sides in the Eredivisie. Yes, they weren't the league champions this year, but he isn't having as many opportunities to initiate blocks, to initiate clearances as perhaps someone like Simican or Tapso, who play for RB Leipzig and Bayer Leverkusen respectively, even though they are some of the better teams in the Bundesliga, still more competitive league. You get into more defensive situations to experience more blocks and clearances. So I think that certainly impacts that side of things. And recoveries per 90, 5.91. It's slightly better than Simican, not as good as Saliba, not as good as Tapso, but errors leading to shots. Some people have highlighted that he is quite rash and he has been a bit clumsy at times and made some mistakes, but these errors don't tend to lead to shots in the same way that, say, Saliba, for instance. We talk about his, how composed he can be, how confident he can be. He's had 4 errors that have led to shots for the opposition this season. I think that maybe highlights his age more than anything else, and he's still inexperienced in the Premier League. But is it fair to describe him as a rash or clumsy player in some instances, or is that just reflective of his need for development?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily put it down to him as a player per se. I do think it's more on the lines of his development. Obviously, the younger you are, even the most experienced young players still are more prone to making mistakes. Whereas if you're asking a 25 or 26-year-old, they have that seasoning. Even Virgil van Dijk made mistakes when he first came to the Premier League, and obviously when he was at Celtic. So I don't put too much stock in that per se. But it kind of goes back to before about how we were saying, well, he might have to maybe taper sides of his game to suit specifically what Arteta wants, and I don't think he'll have the same, at least not as often, that same measure of freedom he gets at Ajax, who obviously can be a bit more brazen in the way they approach football when they're playing domestically, because the quality gap overall between the big three in the Netherlands is vastly superior compared to other sides, really. So I don't think he will have that measure of freedom, but I do think it's good to know that you have a player that can reliably be that way if you need him to be. But I don't think we're going to see him, popping up in the middle third regularly. I think he'll sit big deeper, but to know that if he has to break play on his own, he can do that. So I don't think we're going to get the same rashness per se, but obviously I expect Arteta to develop that out of him over time, because we've seen how well Arteta comes on with younger players and how he kind of irons out their game quite well, and quite quickly within the first 6 to 12 months. You don't see young players making the same mistakes, and they make better decisions pretty immediately when he gets kind of sucks into them. So I'm pretty confident about that.
Yeah, absolutely. We always look, I think that sometimes we're so quick to judge, especially young defenders. Saliba really benefited from the loans that he had at Nice, at Marseille, and obviously the one he went back to Saint-Etienne, specifically the Marseille one, though. He really did kind of learn that aerial side to his game that improved a lot. But what Jurrien Timber lacks that Saliba doesn't is that height. And now we looked at last season, Lisandro Martinez moved to the Premier League, and there was a lot of joking around about, his height. And now Arsenal are signing a defender on the smaller size in terms of height. We hope signing anyway. Do you see or foresee that being an issue for him? Because, 47.4% of aerial duels won is lower than all the others, because he doesn't have that same height. He doesn't get involved in as many aerial duels either. Do you see this as a potential problem?
Maybe in isolation, but so for two things. Ironically enough, when we were linked with Lisandro Martinez, a lot of talk was about we were bringing him to be a left back, not a center back, because one of his issues was his lack of aerial ability. And I think he's proven alongside a more competent defender in the air in Varane, you can kind of dispel that notion. But I think also look at the types of profiles we're bringing in besides that. Declan Rice is pretty astute in the air. Kai Havertz is also good in the air, which we discussed that, and there's a lot of scope to suggest Havertz might be playing in midfield instead of at 9. And if he's playing at 9, you expect him to come back and check back on set pieces and defend in the first place. So I think Timber's not great in the air, and of course in the Netherlands you don't have to be. Most clubs don't play in the air too often. Most of the players on the ground, which is why someone like a Bas Dost has such success in the Netherlands, because he was massive compared to a lot of the defenders. But I think when you have players around him who are better in the air, obviously Ben White, same thing, good in the air. I think that concern can be muted as a collective. In isolation, I think if you're up against someone like, say, Man City or Tottenham with Haaland and Kane, those managers might look to isolate Timber if he is playing and maybe kind of hone in on that particular on set pieces. But that's up to our set piece analysts and specialists to figure out how we can kind of compensate for that. So that's just all part of it, And overall, I wouldn't be too necessarily concerned about it. No.
Let's go to the exciting part to his game, his distribution, his passing. More passes per 90 than any other player on this list, 81.5 per 90, compared to who we look to be as a really ball-playing centre-back, Saliba, 69.6, and a very possession-based side in Arsenal. What he shares with Saliba is the accuracy. Timber, 91.6, Saliba, 91%. Significantly higher than that of Tapsoba and Simikan. It is this passing. I'll just show up the progressive side to that passing as well before we talk about it. Passes into the final third per 90, 9.76. More than double that of Saliba. That is really impressive. And then passes into the box as well, 1.04. Nearly 10 times per 90 across the season what Saliba is bringing as well. That passing element of his game is, I'm going to go on a limb here and probably say, his strongest element to what we recognize him for is his distribution and progression of the ball.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's kind of where you might see those numbers dip a little bit if he's not stepping into midfield as much. Like I say, a lot of video comps are out there. Credit to Twitter for doing what Twitter does and collecting video comps and putting them on about a player that people might not know about. And you obviously have to take with the scope of skepticism, but overall, it does highlight how good of a passer he is. But in a lot of those clips, he's stepping into the middle third to make those passes into the final third. I don't know if you're going to get that from the defensive third, but same thing, it does show that there is confidence that he can maybe bypass the shorter option if we're being pressed, and he can make that pass into the final third pass midfield, maybe release Saka, for example. That's all, kind of why I think we're really actually going in for him, because we need a player that can mirror or better Saliba in that regard. And I do think it became painfully evident when you had Holding in, who isn't a bad defender, but when it comes to being a progressive defender, when it comes to being good on the ball, confident to make the right pass, get out of jail kind of thing, he struggled in a big way. And I think it's not about just defending anymore. You have to have defenders that can be progressive. You have to have really good ball playing center backs for how we operate on the tactics pitch. And Timber checks all the boxes, 10 times over for me. So.
Absolutely. Moving on to what he's like on the ball, and you say there he likes to step into midfields, 1.13 take-ons per 90 with a 50% success rate. It's not as successful as, say, Saliba's, but he is stepping in more than twice as frequently as what Saliba is. And also looking at his progressive carries and his carries into the final third, 2.37 progressive carries per 90 and 1.99 carries into the final third per 90 for a centre-back he is a centre-back for Ajax. People say, look, yes, he's going to play right back for Arsenal. But last season, where we're getting these stats for, he played at right-sided centre-back for Ajax, and he's carrying the ball into the final third of the pitch twice per game. That's really high. It's 4 times the amount, Saliba does for Arsenal. What part of this game, is this something to be concerned or impressed by? It's a strange one for a centre-back having these types of stats.
Maybe both. Again, it's as much as I enjoy Dutch football, obviously any data you come up with when they're playing in the Netherlands, you have to take with a grain of skepticism. Absolutely. Again, because the quality is drastically reduced compared to the Premier League. But again, so if you look at how he plays for Ajax when they're playing Champions League, he still stands out pretty okay. And I think for me, that's maybe more what they look at in terms of what he can do at a higher level, but also he does have the tools to be kind of molded into a player that can succeed at the higher level. So I don't think it's necessarily a worry, but I do think, again, like I said before, these numbers might decrease a little bit, but I do think the efficiency will stay, but maybe the number is going to drop. But I also think this is why a lot of fans look at him and think, maybe he's going to be playing right back. He has played out wide previously, not too much. Again, as you say, last season Ajax didn't play a single game at right back. The 2 seasons prior to that, I think it was a combined 12 or 13 times he played at right back in 2021, 22, and 2021. So it doesn't happen very often. So I wouldn't even look at how he maybe operates for the Netherlands, who struggle at right back with options and at center back with options as well. Not great historically, have really never been great overall. So I think it's kind of more of a, if he can do it, we have to kind of just utilize him there to the best of our ability. But I think for Arsenal, for now, depending on what we do elsewhere, the rest of the summer, I would say he's coming in as a center back. Can he be shifted to a right back if, say, we sell Tierney and shift Tomiyasu to left back? I think theoretically we could do that, sure. Obviously, I don't know. But based off what we know now, I think he's coming in and he's going to be number 2 to Saliba, maybe challenge at right back depending on how things go. But it's still the kind of player you want to see us bring in terms of fit for the profile, fit for Arteta, and I think he transitioned quite well given his physical attributes as well. So.
It's coming from Matt Jesus. Are you sure he's a centre back? These numbers are ridiculous, and this
100% sure.
Yeah, he's absolutely is, and that's where he played every single game of last season. Yes, he's played at right back. Yes, for both the Netherlands and Ajax, he's played in that right back position. In the youth level, he even played a game at defensive midfield, I noticed as well, which, considering how comfortable he is on the ball, it doesn't surprise me at all. But primary wise, like the priority position for him is that right-sided centre back. That said, in terms of coming on to kind of a final discussion and verdict on Timber, I think what I can see happening is him playing still at times in that right back hybrid role that we have, just because that's the role. If you look at who we have there in Ben White, and if it's not Ben White, it's Tomiyasu, he just seems to fit stylistically, into what Arteta sees as a right back. And that's why I think why this deal just makes so much sense is because all of his attributes other than maybe the height aspect, which I don't think is necessarily a problem too much anyway. Maybe it will be if he has to go one-on-one with Haaland, but we might hopefully think if we've got Saliba available, you'd tailor your defence to go up against a player like Haaland, and probably Timber wouldn't start that game. But certainly when we're going up against other sides that aren't necessarily as threatening in the air, he's going to be such an asset for our possession, our control, our progression of the ball. And I can see him rotating not only with Saliba, as we've discussed, but also with Ben White as well. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. And I don't rule it out. And I think a lot of that is contingent on what happens with Tomiyasu. But I do think what Arteta is showing is that he wants to have options depending on how he wants to set the team up. And I don't think you're going to see a massive change in approach game by game. Most managers don't do that because continuity is important for getting a string of results. But I do think when you want to have minor tweaks or mix and match based off of who you're up against and how they operate tactically, you'll see him come in. I do think you might see him appear at right back. Also, we haven't really talked about it, but his turn of pace is actually quite quick. Off the blocks, he's quite quick. He has good recovery pace, so you could see that being utilized as an inverted right back as well because he's so good at carrying the ball, because he's such a progressive passer. Maybe that pace is a bit muted at center back when he's, kind of sitting deeper, but as an inverted right back, given his whole profile, you could see that happening for sure. So I don't rule it out. I think we'll probably see it. Again, it's hard to know what Arteta's thinking at this point, which I think is a good thing. If we're kind of guessing, it means opponents are guessing as well. But for base value as a deal, irrespective of the possible money, I think it's kind of a no-brainer for me. So,
absolutely, I agree. If Arsenal can get him for around £40 million, which I think is probably the figure that we get close to if you were going to get him. I know that Ajax want 50. We've bid 30. I can see us getting close to that 40. I know Ajax can be right sticklers with negotiations, but hopefully Arsenal can get a deal done. It seems they've kind of promised that he could move on this summer, and so they'll want to get a good deal, obviously, and they are notorious in getting good deals, but let's see. I'm hopeful of that. I saw a good comment from Marcus says, is his middle name Gabriel? Drew, do you want to take a guess? It's funny that Marcus asked it. Guess what his middle name is?
Maybe. I don't know. I actually don't know.
No, it's Norman. His middle name's Norman.
There you go.
I wanted to get people's hopes up, but no, it's Norman. I'm not even genuinely. Jurrien David Norman Timber is his full name.
Hilariously not Dutch.
Yeah, very not Dutch. Indeed, very not Dutch at all. Norman, I love it. Maybe we should stop the Gabriels and just bring as many Normans in as we can to the team. That's far more challenging. That's certainly a bigger challenge for Edu. Let's bring the Normans in. We've got a few minutes left. So if you've got any specific questions that you'd like to throw into myself and Drew, we've got a couple of minutes to take those on. So let's jump into the chat and see if we've got some. O'Malley says, would him at right back allow Kieran Tierney to flourish more so on the left, given the news that he's probably going to stay? It's a good question.
I don't know if it's necessarily a flourish. I think Tierney is always the left back. I think it's just a matter of, hilariously enough, one of the things you might actually see is if we're not starting Zinchenko one match and you're seeing Tierney, who isn't as good in that same Zinchenko role, we might kind of see almost what we saw when Partey was playing right back and we're switching the flank, we're inverting the fullback from. You might see Timber start at right back and invert, and you might have Tierney be more traditional left back, or if it's Kiwior there, same thing. So I do think if we end up keeping Tierney, I do think you're getting those maybe mix and matching depending on the flank, depending on what you're doing, who's available. I wouldn't say Tierney's going to flourish. So I think we know what we have with him. I think he's at the age where we're not going to get much development from him. It's just going to be he's reliable when he's fit. He can defend quite well. He's got the physical attributes you want. So yeah, it can't hurt. So.
Indeed. Marcus says, where does he fit into the team if everyone is fit? Does he fit onto the bench, I guess? Is that what
That's the thing. That's the thing, right? As of right now, the only hole he can fill right now is right center back, in theory. Again, that's also contingent on what else happens. I know Drago and I have talked about this before, but if Tierney leaves and you see Tomiyasu switch to left back, then Timber can slide in at both right center back and right back. Let
me throw you something as well, Drew. because I saw a report that said kind of like how would Timber fit in, and actually I can't remember where it was that reported it, but they suggested using Saliba as a left-sided centre-back if you wanted to rotate Gabriel and then put Timber right-sided centre-back and play with Saliba, which Saliba played left-sided centre-back at both Nice and Saint-Etienne. So I think that's an option for us. I know we've got Kivior and you'd think he's the obvious choice, but the way that he was using Kivior at left back, I think that's potentially something Arteta's maybe sees in Kivior's future. He's played there for Poland, did really well there as well. So maybe Saliba being used as a left-sided centre-back with Timber coming in as a real genuine option at right-sided centre-back could be something we see more so.
For sure. We've also seen Tomiyasu play left-sided centre-back for Japan and for Bologna as well. And for us. And he's also played left-back. So the thing is, this goes right back to the overall point is we have such versatility in terms of how we can build out a starting 11 based off of the need, whether it's fitness, form, or who the opponent is. I think he'll fit in. It's just a matter of, I think we're pulling away from putting players into specific boxes in terms of can a player play 2 or 3 roles? If they can, then you'll see them in those 2 or 3 roles at some point across the season, depending on what the need is. And for me, that's kind of the most important factor of it.
Jakob the Gooner says, what would be the maximum you would pay for Timber?
40, probably. I think at a push, I think 50 would be
about 41.
Excessive. Yeah, I think 50 would be a bit excessive. I think 40 million pounds would be more than enough. 50 is, I think, a bit. Yeah.
Did you pay 42?
Sure. Why not?
43. What about 43, Drew? Would you pay 43?
I'm going to punch you in the face right now.
I'm curious what you can't do. You say you pay 40. Would you pay 41?
See, let's not talk about Twitter debates about Declan Rice. We'll leave that for
I'm just incrementally increasing the amount. It's a fairly normal process, Drew. I don't know why people struggle with that so much.
No, the max I pay would be 40. I think anything above that would be, I wouldn't necessarily call it a risk, but at that same price, you can maybe find somebody else without going into 50. So
Joshua says, blown away with Drew. His brilliant analysis. I thought he was blown away with Drew. His analysis is also good. Would have been the better way to put it. He's a beautiful man. Harish says, is he really brought as a right-sided centre-back / right-back? Personally, I think he'll play right centre-back / left-back. Remember, Arteta likes to use right-footed players at left-back against tricky wingers. So I could see him playing a left-back inverted role. What do you make of that left field view?
And it's not something I've considered, but it also kind of makes sense. I have to kind of sit with that more, but that's actually a really good shout that I don't think anybody is really considering. And a lot of the sound bites coming out of maybe the deal, that's not really quite been mentioned, especially after there's a scope to suggest we can keep Tierney. But it's a possibility. But again, versatility. So yeah, it would not shock me if he magically popped up on the left side of the back four at some point. So yeah, good
Absolutely.
shout.
Indeed. Yeah, good shout. Absolutely. If you are watching on catch up, please make sure you leave your thoughts on the deal down below. And of course, you can, if you are watching live, just return and leave some comments that will linger onwards into the ether forever down in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed this, and even if you haven't, just because Drew's face is on the screen, this is worthy of a like. Please do drop a like. Stop shaking your head. Please do drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Drew, thank you so much for your time. Tell people where they can find you, my friend.
Well, hilariously, I'm actually thinking about changing my Twitter handle to xgrump.
I was going to say this. This is such a good name.
It is. I'm strongly considering it, but until then, you can find me at MixKidVMix on Twitter, and my link to my work for 101 Great Goals is in my profile. You can catch me there. And just a fair warning, on Twitter, if you're only looking for football discourse, I'm not your guy. I also talk about things like mental health, issues with racism, both in sport and out of sport, general history nerdness, and travel stuff too. So just bear that in mind moving forward.
Absolutely. No, that's great. I think giving people a heads up on what you tweet. I tweet about, well, actually, I get into loads of arguments. So if you like watching someone argue with loads of people, you should follow me at the Gooner Talk TV because I do that all of the time. Drew,
if you don't start tweeting about golf, I'm going to be really sad. Start talking about the Masters.
I haven't tweeted about golf once, but I have considered changing the name to the Golf Talk. Because I can keep TGT. You know, it might happen. You never know. Oh, I love this. Ex-Forest Grump says underrated Holdini.
That's brilliant as well. If I was a Nottingham Forest fan, that'd be perfect. But
that would be absolutely spot on. But yes, you can find Drew on Twitter, as he says, at Mixed Kid Remix. You can find that's literally the words Mixed Kid Remix. Although, as he says, it might be changing very soon to Ex Grump, which I'm so
maybe
behind.
today. It might happen within the next 10 minutes. So bear that in mind.
Yeah, you don't want to allow people to nick that, so you want to get in there quick and change it. Thank you, everybody that's listened. I really appreciate your time, as always. I can hear him clicking in the background. He really wants to make sure this is done. It's a race. Thank you, everybody.
Here we go.
Drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll be back tomorrow morning at 8 a.m, of course, as always, to bring you all the latest. We've got news on Partey to discuss. We've got the Declan Rice situation. I found that hilarious, by the way, that I finished the show about 8:40, and at 9 o'clock we had news that Declan Rice was receiving a second bid. It's just like they wait. They wait for me to finish the morning shows, and then they release news. That's why I appreciate David Ornstein for releasing that Timber news at 11 o'clock last night UK time. That was very much appreciated. We'll see you soon, guys. Have a fantastic day, and as always, up the Arsenal.